we quit before we reached any kind of like it was about to happen. Like we actually were there actually because like I said, people were calling us and people were like, oh, like I remember like, oh, you can go on tour, but like that is just not where my mindset was.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, I just added some stickers on my Instagram for sale. They're $3 each, include shipping. So if you want to support the podcast, you can buy them there. I also have a Patreon. It's $1 a month, which equates to like 2.5 Starbucks coffee. So if you want to support the podcast in that way, you can do so by going to patreon.com/thiswasthescene and signing up for that. Donuts and Glory were a band from SoCal. They opened for bigger acts like No Use for a Name, Suicide Machines, Nonsense, 10-Foot Pole, The Queers, the Quincy Punks, etc. In '96, they recorded when Pregnasaurs Ruled The Earth at Westbeach in Hollywood with Donell Cameron, the same studio where Fat Records had used for recording many of its bands in the early years. After the release of their record, they toured the West Coast once and toured the East Coast and back twice. The second album was never recorded. This interview is an accidental part 2. I only thought there was going to be a part 1 because I talked to Gary in episode 114, which you can find on thiswasthescene.com or on YouTube because it's not on any podcast apps anymore because they only hold the first 100 episodes or the current 100 episodes. When I talked to Gary, there was no mention or even thought of them doing a reunion show, but he finally got the guys to say yes, and then they're playing their first reunion show this August, on August 3rd. It'll be their first show in 27 years. It's at Chain Reaction in Orange County. The first show already sold out, and they added a second one the day before, the one that sold out on Friday, August 2nd, so you can go get tickets for that. But when they announced the show, Gary was like, you got to talk to Freddie. He's going to have a lot more stories to tell. So I got Freddie on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. Their upcoming reunion shows. Were they rusty at their first practice? Traveling the world solo? Seeing Sublime before they became Sublime? Putting out their first 7-inch? Keeping a journal? Playing new old songs at the reunion show? Are they writing new songs? And a ton more. Go follow their Instagram. It's Donuts and Glory Official on the gram. That's where you want to keep up to date with their second show since the first one already sold out. The second one is 50% sold out, and that's on August 2nd at Chain Reaction in Anaheim. I got a link to buy the tickets in the show notes, so to make it easy for you, you can just go there and click, or you can go to their Instagram, follow it, and click the links in their profile. Lastly, the way I actually make money is I have an animation company called Drive80.com, Drive80.com. I do explainer videos, whiteboard animations, logo animations. So if you have a marketing director in your company that said, gee, we really need one of those kinds of videos, then you can email me at mike@drive80.com to get some more information. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Since it's relevant right now, and you guys have a show, I just mentioned it's already sold out. It's on August 3rd at Chain Reaction in Anaheim. That sold out in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks?
No. It was like three hours.
Was it 3 hours, really?
Yeah, because it got opened up. Yeah, it was like 3 hours. We knew about it because we like thought about it, and then I was in town and we rehearsed. So we knew that we were going to do the show, but like we were going to drop our ticket sales open up. And so it happened that like on a Friday, I think it was last Friday afternoon. It was like maybe 3 hours, and then it sold out. But it was like it wasn't officially like announced. It was like kind of just hinted toward, I think. Maybe it was officially announced, but it was like on Facebook page, I believe.
How's that feel? Since you guys haven't played in so long, and
yeah, it was like you don't know like the scope of things really. It's just like you kind of gauge it on. Well, first of all, like I was just kind of like disengaged from it, pretty much. Like. I knew Gary, the drummer, had like a Facebook page, and I'm not on Instagram, so I think I'm guessing there's like more, maybe there's more activity on Instagram, but I'm not even really sure.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I'm guessing. I was looking at that. Yeah, there's somebody posts something about. I mean, I can see it, and someone posts something randomly over the few years, and some people respond, and whatever the number is. You don't know if that equates to like five guys just like kind of responding, and they're like hardcore, so they make comments and stuff like that, but you don't know like the true scope of things. So the fact that I had no idea how that was going to work when the tickets opened up because it could sell like 30 tickets all of a sudden, and that caps out, and that could be it. But the fact that it sold that quickly, I was pretty surprised. Like, oh shit, okay, cool.
When you launched it, were you kind of nervous that it wouldn't?
Oh no, I mean, nervous isn't like anything I feel about it. No, because like I mean, here's basically what it is. We wrote all that stuff and we did all that stuff, but I never really thought about it. I mean, we would put it out, we'd play our shows, and we would make like connections with people. But I never, I never got like nervous or stage fright or anything like that, like ever about anything. Basically, it's this: we would play like bigger shows, and then we would play like tiny shows. Like we'd be on tour, and there literally would be like two people in some like house in Santa Cruz or something, or like a comic book shop, and I don't know where it was, Austin or something, and there's like 10 people there, or two people, or whatever the situation is, or like bigger shows where there'd be hundreds or maybe 1,000 people or whatever it was. We would just play the same like intensity no matter what. Even if like we're like in the rehearsal studio, we would just I don't know, it was just like if you were into it and liked it, cool. And if you like I didn't even care. We'd play hard every single time. Actually some people came and recorded us. Like we practiced in March. This was like the first time we really got together like in 27 years, and Gary reached out, and like my dad was having his 90th birthday, and so I came out and like, okay, so let's practice to see if we have chemistry. So we played one day. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, we have chemistry. It's good. And then the next day, some people came over, like a couple people, and they like recorded us, like did some video. But it was just like two or three people, maybe. I know just the fact that if there's just like one person there, it like goes from like, I mean, it goes from like just doing a practice to almost like a show. Yeah, because like you're kind of playing for the person that's just sitting there. And even though we'll play hard for ourselves, like we'll do a lot of like rehearsals type of stuff of like stopping and going like, yeah, let's go over this part again, and like do kind of more practicey stuff. But I remember it happening a long time ago when we would play in our practice studio, and just like one random person would show up, and all of a sudden we were playing like a full set list, a full show, and just going, but going like 100% as if it was like 1,000 people, and just I don't know. It's just I don't know what that is. It's just trying to connect to people.
How rusty or non-rusty were you guys at the first practice?
I was not rusty. I have continued to just play music ever since. I got better. I'm sure. I mean, I played for fucking whatever that's 27 years of playing. I got better. Gary seemed on. There was a when we played. What were we playing? We were playing what's that song? Chronological, I think. There's a part where it's like a red light, a green light, like it stops. It does like these stop things. And in the when Pregnasaurs Ruled The Earth, he does like some fills in there, and like he does them like really really fast. And I remember when we recorded that, he had not really done those fills before, and like those were for me, like I always kind of remembered those fills, and they were like really fast, and he kind of snuck them into the pockets there. Yeah, he played it when we practiced a couple, whatever that was in March. He did it again. I'm like, yeah, okay, he still got it. He claims to have like had an elbow injury. I don't know if he claimed. I mean, I'm sure he did, but I didn't hear it in his playing. Like he says he's rusty, but it sounded great. Brian, I think may have like he forgot some songs, but like there's so I mean I forgot a bunch of songs too, but I rehearsed like on my own before we practiced with each other, just because I probably knew about like 3 songs of just remembering them and maybe like intermittently playing them over like the 20 years or so. But I had to go through the catalog and like kind of like practice. So when we did go and practice, we were probably like about 80% already.
How are you guys going to keep up practicing between now and August? Because you live on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I live in Brooklyn. Brian was supposed to be here last Saturday. He was like in another band, and he was supposed to have like a festival, but I guess it got pushed back or to the fall. So he didn't. He was supposed to be here last Saturday, and that we were gonna sit down and probably sit like on a bench and like play things through, but weren't able to do that. So I actually looked into practicing like online. Like I don't know, I've seen people looks like they're practicing in real time. So there's some sort of way of doing that where there's no delay, because that screws things up. Apparently there's some Ethernet cable or something that you do to make it in real time. So we're probably we'll probably all get that, see if that works, and do some rehearsals online. via internet. I don't know, maybe like it's like more so I need to practice more so with Brian because Gary kind of just picks things up. Well, there's more like coordination that has to be with like like chords and notes and stuff. There's just kind of more coordination that has to happen. But I don't know, maybe Brian can fly out here, or maybe I can fly out there, or even just for like a weekend or something, just kind of play. We're before we play though, we're gonna have like maybe like 5 days or something because I'm coming out to see my family over like in Palm Springs or something, and after that, like it's kind of like a family reunion, and then I'll have about a week with Brian and Gary, but that'll be plenty.
That's cool. Like, did you? I don't know. Like, it seemed like Gary kind of held the torch for the band for the years because he was running the Instagram, and we talked about that in his interview. And did you pay attention, or did you? I don't know. Did you kind of have like that nostalgia for it, or that miss, or did you not really think about it until recently?
No, I would. It would be misleading to say like I never thought about it. Of course, like I thought about it. Gary, like you said, I knew that Gary. First of all, Gary had like a different experience.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that because he mentioned that.
No, yeah, I mean, I heard that episode or that interview. I know about it, but yeah, I've thought about it over the years, but like I wasn't after that album. I kind of didn't live in Southern California anymore. Okay, finished college and I saved up money and I more or less like traveled around by myself for about a good 5 years. I would like save up money as like a waiter. Actually, I was in Orange County. I'd save up and then I would leave. So I left for like 9 months and I went around the world and then I came back and then I worked at Champs Americana in Irvine Spectrum back in the day. And I saved money there and then I traveled to like Latin America for a year. So, but if you just add like the work time saving, then the traveling time, it like equated to maybe like four years of just kind of traveling, and doing that. And then I moved to Spain, actually.
Really?
Yeah, that was right after 9/11. Because I remember I passed through New York City. It was like November, so like I saw the World Trade Center, and it was like still smoldering. It was like pretty crazy. Then I went to Barcelona, which I had like a couple of friends that I had made. They'd been living in Orange County, but then they moved back. So I was out there only for like a few months. I was like looking for a job teaching English, and then I was just like kind of over it. It was really cold. It started snowing, and I'm like, I went to my Spanish and like, does it normally snow here? Like, no, it never snows. And it was like, while there was internet, it was like MapQuest era. So I just had like, maps and of subway trains, and I would go to like English institutes to try to like apply for a job. And I finally did get a job after maybe going like 30 different places for like 30 interviews. But it was like $4 an hour, and you can only work like 18 hours a week. I'm like, this math doesn't work. It's snowing. I'm cold. So I got a email from an old friend from high school, and he said, I'm in Berkeley over here, and I'm looking for a roommate. If someone moved out, I just wrote him back. I said, I'll move in. He said, okay. So I flew back and drove my 92 Honda Civic up to Berkeley. And then I lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco and Berkeley and Oakland for about 5 years. But while this is all going on, though, it's like different chapters in my life. So it wasn't like I didn't like thinking about Donuts and Glory, but like my mind was definitely like where I was.
Were you a little like, that's jaded, but were you a little disappointed that the band didn't really go anywhere? Did that kind of stick with you, or did you let that go?
No. I mean, that was definitely a choice. Like I chose, because like when we basically after we did 2 tours, definitely our last show was in Denver. I think it was the Bluebird Theater. I think maybe it was. After that show, we came back and we started getting calls from like promoters saying, hey, do you want to play this? You want to play that? You want to do this? You want to do that? Then there was also like, I don't know, some talk about touring in like Australia or Europe or something. So there started to be like kind of like what you're looking for when you're a small band. First of course you start at like parties and like backyards and garages, and then start doing like little clubs, and you kind of start real scrappy, and you're trying to just get whatever you can. When people start calling you and saying, hey, do you want to play this like kind of bigger show, or do you want to go maybe do a tour? it's kind of like, it's a turning point. It's like you're not calling them anymore, they're calling you. Kind of things were starting to like happen like that, but we just kept saying no because like when we came back, we were on like, I guess, a hiatus, like we're taking a break kind of thing. It's just like the break just kept going and going until it just, then I started thinking about traveling and stuff. So I went that direction. So it was kind of like there wasn't like a declaration like the band is over. It was more just like we would get these calls and like, oh, we would turn them down. Oh, we're on break right now or whatever. But it just kind of extended. And then essentially like I kind of pivoted and wanted to travel. And that's pretty much how it ended from my perspective. It wasn't like after Denver, like it's over, I'm not doing it anymore. It was kind of just taking a break that just extended onward.
That lasted 27 years.
Wait, I'm pretty sure I didn't answer the question.
No, I think you did. I mean, it just kind of sounds like. I mean, I guess what I'm gonna do is I want to go back to the beginning of this and kind of I think it'll lead back up to what I asked to kind of see because I think that'll kind of answer it a bit more because in talking about that time you'll kind of talk about where your mindset was and then afterwards you be like that. Yeah, man. So I mean, as I always do, I love where this is going already, but yeah. So I always ask people before I start getting into the bands or whatever they started, how'd you get involved in the scene?
I was at Tustin High School, and that's where I was like going to parties as a kid, and so you'd go to parties in people's garages, and what are you doing tonight? And so basically every Friday and Saturday night was going around like Tustin and Warren, kind of that area. And so you just go to wherever the party was. So there was this guy, Mike Seamers, this big tall guy. Mike Seamers, he's having a get together. Okay, let's go. So we go in there. It's like a little apartment, and it's like it's like, oh, a band's gonna play. Oh, really? Okay, cool. And at that point, there weren't like a lot of like garage bands around. Not really at all. I go in there, and it's all this dark garage with like debris and other stuff, but you kind of couldn't see what was going on. You could see like the lights of their amps. It was kind of like looked like kind of like a Star Wars kind of looking kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it was just like 1, 2, 3, 4, clicking they do a count in, and all of a sudden they just bust out and start playing this like crazy, like wild, fast music. And this guy that was in the band, Pete Bain, it was Nonsense. The band was Nonsense. They're from Tustin. This guy, Mark Ollie, was the singer. I think they were playing, it was called Steven Seagal Marked for Death. And then I remember Pete kicked the guitar or mic stand. The mic stand like stayed vertical, flew across the garage in the darkness, and like landed in the debris and made like a big mess. I'm like, oh my god, these guys are fucking wild. So I'm like, after that, I'm like, that's cool. But really, what it taught me and showed me was that just normal guys, like I wasn't necessarily friends with them, but I knew later became friends. But like they were just guys that you would see around like Tustin, and these like normal guys, well maybe not so normal, but these regular guys could play music and could play like what I thought was cool. Like these guys are wild. I thought this was cool. And at that time I was into like very much into like thrash metal. So I was into like Slayer and Metallica and Anthrax and like more like the earlier stuff at that point. I'm like, oh, they're like a punk rock band, and my sister was like a punk rocker, so she was like into like Black Flag and X and that kind of thing. And so like it was around me, and I knew what it was, but like I was like a kid, so I was kind of just discovering things. So there's a couple of things. Like if you listen to thrash metal or you listen to any kind of like pop music at that time, it was like music was for musicians, and musicians were trained and took lessons and were some sort of like people that were like really knowledgeable, and like especially the people you heard on the radio, they must have gone to like music college or something. And when I saw these guys Nonsense, like these definitely are just kind of like some kids around town, and they were producing cool, they were doing cool stuff. Then also I remember kind of it was a time where like there's no internet really. You would hear about something or you'd read about something, and I lived in Tustin, and there was this place called Top 10 Records. So you would go look for like you would hear about an album or a band and you would just literally have to buy the CD to hear what it sounded like. So it was like a lot of experimentation. The one thing I really liked about thrash metal was like, the power and just the sound of it, like the feel, but also like the speed. In fact, I don't even think we called it speed metal too, I think. And there would just be like fast parts. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's like, but punk rock, or if you're listening to the right kind, there's like it's a genre of music where they're doing my favorite part of speed metal all the time, which is the fast part. It's like, oh yeah, I can just cut to the chase. So I started getting to. I saw what's the guy's name? Kyle Shallhammer, kid from my school. He had a shirt on, and the shirt was this guy, this like kind of bald skinhead guy with boots on and his head down, and it said "Minor Threat." I'm like, oh, well, what the fuck's that? Okay, so I went to Top 10 Records and I looked it up. I don't got something, and then I listened to it. I'm like, oh my god, this is the best. This is the best there is. 1 2 just fast and everything about it. And also like his lyrics, because like if you listen to like Slayer, it's like satanic nonsense, and Iron Maiden's about like medieval, mythology, and just like kind of dragons and kind of like nonsense. Ian MacKaye is just talking about being 19 and talking about the scene and just talking about stuff and talking about like I don't know, like the football players and whatever else, like kind of just very normal, relatable, non fantasy type topics. So I heard that and I started getting into that. And then I was at my brother is like a little bit younger than me. He's about 4 years younger. And he's kind of like in middle school, or yeah, he's like in middle school at that time. And he has like some skateboard friends, and I'm at my house, and this kid, Jim Ehrlich, his name was. He actually like passed away on accident about a year ago. Great guy. He's a little kid. He's got long, big, crazy, wild, curly hair, and he's like, it's like the big, short skateboard era. And he comes in, and he brings in some 7 inches. And my dad always like we always had music at my house, and my dad had an old turntable, so we put it on there. It's like this, it's like this crazy fast music. So it kind of sounded like Minor Threat, but it was like this janky kind of up and down, and it was Operation Ivy, and it was Hectic, or I think it was called. I'm like, oh my god, it was like the exact same vein of like Minor Threat in a way, with kind of like a faster parts and kind of sounding wild and sounding like Nonsense, which I didn't understand that Nonsense was a ska punk band at that time, but I didn't even know what I was listening to. I just saw what was happening. So I started kind of piecing things together, and at that point, I'm like reading like Maximum Rock and Roll and just kind of reading other things. Oh, Comet Bus, I started reading a lot of, and then he starts bringing over. He brought some other 7 inches. Or he brought over Crimp Shrine, another 7 inch. I'm like, oh wow, this is cool. This is real rough and real raw kind of stuff, and just talking about like their neighborhood in Berkeley and inspiration and kind of more relatable topics. So I'm like, okay, cool. And you can then listening to like Black Flag and TV Party and Beer and just kind of like stuff that's happening in your life. So I'm like, okay. So I'm having a party at my parents' house. My parents are out of town. Oh, what was it? No. There was this nerdy kid in high school, and there was like some kind of like, but I'm like friends with them, but they're like nerdy kind of guys. His name was John Kim. For some reason, he had a bass guitar. I didn't even know what a bass guitar was. I'm like looking, I'm like, what is these thick strings? What is this? And he was supposedly playing music with these other kind of kids playing acoustic guitar, but they're kind of like, I don't know, kind of like REM, kind of someone plays at the church kind of guys. So I wasn't gravitating toward playing with them, but it also showed me like, oh look, like a normal kid that you know from school, they have like a bass guitar. I don't even know what a bass guitar is. So I'm like, shoot, okay. Has 4 strings. It looks cool. It sounds cool. And it just kind of was fascinated by it. And so I drive down. I like, well, where do you get a bass guitar? So I looked up in probably the Yellow Pages or something, and it said, or like, there's a place called Guitar Center. I'm like, oh, okay. But the Guitar Center I went to was was the one on Sunset in Hollywood. So I go there with my mom. Mom, can I get an instrument? She's like, oh, she's Filipino. That's why she talks like that. And when I recollect, like, oh yeah, she like basically just supports any, like, if you're interested in something, she'll like let us pursue it. My dad too. She's like, okay, yeah. Okay, let's go. So I drive down to Sunset, Boulevard, and we go into the Guitar Center, which I guess is like an important, like, kind of iconic place. And I get like a black and white P bass. And I don't know how I knew a P bass was the one to get, but like, that's the main bass. So I buy it and I bring it home and I kind of start fiddling around with it. And then like I take lessons, or no, I don't take lessons. I just have it at the house. And then I have a party, and this kid, his name is John Benson, who also sadly passed away long ago. He's in at my house. I hear this like noise. I'm like, and it's like it's making all this noise. I'm like, what the fuck is that? So I go down. It's like my own house. There's like a party, but someone got on my bass and started hitting him. I'm like, what's he doing? He was like slapping the bass. He was doing something, and I'm like, oh my god. But I'm like, what do I know? I'm like looking at this going, oh my god, what's going on? So at that point, I was like really, really impressed by him. Like, where'd you learn how to play like that? And he said, oh, I take lessons from this guy. I think his name's Jason Hamill. He was like in Anaheim or something like that. And so he gives me his phone number, and I start taking lessons with this dude. And he's like this short, kind of like heavy metal guy with like a 6-string bass, and he had like a Tasmanian devil tattoo. So this guy's like starts teaching me. He's like, oh, what do you want to learn? At this point, I'm like listening to all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm listening to like Primus and Red Hot Chili Peppers, but also like Minor Threat and Operation Ivy. So I'm just kind of just listening to all kinds of stuff. So he taught me some basic stuff. So I took lessons with him for maybe just like, really was not long. It was maybe like two months, maybe 3 months. And then that was the history of my lessons. And he just showed me some exercises. So at this point now, like you got all these like backstories. So it's like, well, of course, like what do you do next? You like, let's start a band.
Did you start going to local shows at all, or did you get into shows because you were playing them?
Yeah, no. I was also working at a coffee shop. I was working at Renaissance Coffee, which is located in Tustin Marketplace back then, by the movie theater. And I knew this girl, Monica, my friend, or who became my friend, and she was from nearby Irvine, so she was like kind of like a person that didn't, became friends with. She said, "Oh, you play bass?" And I go, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, I really like the bass. It's like I like what it does in the music. I'm gonna see a show, Skanking Pickle." She's like, "Oh, it's a great show. The guy like gets on a unicycle and rides off the stage, and like it's just a cool, fun show. Do you want to go?" I said, "Okay." So I went to that show. It was like in, I don't know, maybe Fullerton or something. So maybe that was like one of the first shows I went to that wasn't like in a backyard. And they played. I'm like, okay, now I'm getting into this now, because I just kind of just saw just like the fun, the energy, like the rebelliousness, the expressive, just like it was I was getting into it. And that's when I started a band with my brother. My brother got like a drum kit. Then we tried out a couple guitar players, and we got this guy Eric from the neighborhood, and he was like this kid with like long hair, and he had this like kind of crappy guitar that was like some Fender knockoff, but he had a guitar, so like he was about 87% chance of being in the band by virtue of owning a guitar. And he's like, "Oh, I like Black Flag and Neil Young." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So he played some stuff, and he could barely play like a power chord, but like, that's cool. And then we started the band. It was called Duct Tape Oven Mitt was the name of the band. And we had like songs like I Hate No Fear Stickers, Marky Mark versus AC Slater was another song. Whatever Happened to Mr. T, Hair on My Tongue, which is about my friend's girlfriend who was annoying, so Hair on My Tongue. Yeah, those are like the kind of songs. But it was like pretty funny, because I was like, I remember the Mr. T song. At that point, I started like having bass player magazines. So I'm like really kind of getting deep into it at that point. And I'm like playing like chords on the bass with the back of my nails, like flat, like hitting chords like Les Claypool kind of stuff, and like doing a little slapping part of it. But then there'd be like a part that was like kind of like a Minor Threat ripoff. So I was like piecing things together here. Yeah, so we started playing parties. So like the first show we played was like, what was her name? Nikki Henderson, I think. She was like a block away, and we played her backyard. So we started hitting up backyards and playing different backyards, but we were like kind of good in our way, because at that point, like there were no bands when someone saw us, and like the songs were like pretty good or pretty decent, and they're funny, and kind of just the energy was there. So people liked it. I'm like, okay, cool. and I liked it. That was like the main thing. It was like just expressing what I was into. At the same time, though, I'm like, I was at UC Irvine at that point, actually. So I'm like driving around a lot at that time in my car, kind of like drinking coffee and hanging out. And then I would go to like record stores. So I was buying vinyl and buying, at this point I'm into it. And I go to Vinyl Solution in Huntington Beach. That's where I saw on this bulletin board like a handwritten note, a handwritten bulletin or a little flyer. It must have been Gary who wrote it because it looked like, hey, even now it's like how Gary writes and thinks and how it is. And it was like, it said something like, do you like punk rock music, Gutter Mouth, No Effects, something, something? We're looking for a bass player and a singer. I'm like, oh shit, I'm all those things. Yeah, at that point though, I'm like I'm saying Nonsense. So I saw Nonsense play a couple times. They were playing with Guttermouth and they were playing with Sublime. I saw them like playing like really early on.
Holy shit.
Yeah, like I'm like, what is that? It's like it's in Fullerton. It's actually at the same club, I think. I can't remember what this place was called. I'm they're gonna like, oh, Nonsense is playing after school today. It's like a Thursday or something. Like, okay, so let's go. So we show up there at like 9 o'clock, and there's like this ripped up clothes and Black Flag T-shirt and chain wallet, shaved heads and tattoos looking kind of guy. Which at that point there weren't as many people like that yet. So I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, oh, it's like some sort of like Black Flag kind of early '80s like hardcore guy. And they get on stage. And then they start playing all of a sudden, and then like it's a lot of energy. It's like boom, bang, bang, boom, bang. It's like this kind of like ska thing. And then there's like two guys I guess there must have been their friends. They get right up to like the microphone. It's just the two of them, and they start like crazy dancing in front of them. And there's seriously like there had to have been like 14 people there. And like, what's this band called? And then I noticed like I was like really good at guitar and he was a good singer. And like, oh, what are they called? Oh, Sublime. I'm like, oh, okay,
Oh, wow.
whatever.
Jesus.
So at that point, like this is kind of what's going on. I'm like seeing all these shows. Oh, at the same time. Oh, this was like in high school. So this is like right when I'm starting to get into everything. In high school, they're like, oh, it's like again, like a Thursday afternoon. Oh, there's like a cool band playing. I'm like, oh, okay, where? Oh, in Irvine in the shopping mall. I said, okay. So I go there and it's like this whole crazy, like intricate stage show. And they're pretending to be matadors and doing all this crazy shit. And there's this chick like with like a bikini top on and kicking and shit. And like, oh, what are they called? No Doubt. Oh, okay. But they were like playing at like a shopping mall, and it was just like after school, and it was just like kind of kids from the school, and so small time affair. But like, okay, so there's like something going on because they were like clearly elevated talent. You would see them and go, wow, these guys they were really like talented.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that because Coachella is happening right now, and No Doubt and Sublime are like some of the main acts that are playing. So it's just so funny for you seeing them. And I mean, obviously Brad's still not around, but his son's playing, and it's just crazy you're seeing like the beginnings of that, and now
Absolutely. So when you're seeing that though, it's like, so you're doing like your small time like towny stuff, but like these people are also just kind of like what would be normal people that were just talented and good. So this is like what's going on. And so you see this and you're like, oh shoot, okay. So like I just started getting more into it. And at that point I'm just starting to see like going to shows all the time at that point. So it's like who was around? Guttermouth I saw a bunch of times, and Voodoo Glow Skulls were playing a lot at that time, all over the place. And so I just basically was going to a show like one or two shows every weekend. And sometimes like on a random like Wednesday night. So at that point, I answered the ad to go see the band play, or the ad that I saw at Vinyl Solution, and it's in some warehouse in like Irvine in like the industrial area. I go in there and it's like a paper factory or something. So there's these enormous spools, I guess you'd call them, of paper, but they're like, I don't know, like 7 feet wide spools of paper, like enormous. I don't know what you call them, but they're like stacked to the ceiling, so it was like kind of surreal looking. And when you go in there, and these three guys are in there set up with like, I don't know, kind of like a Marshall stack. And remember he had these guys, and it was Gary on drums, Brian, and then there was this other guy Dan that was in the band, and he was like playing like a flying V. So I'm seeing these guys, And and I remember seeing the snare. So I don't even know anyone's name yet because I just show up and like, hey, what's going on? I didn't know his name was Gary even at that point. I'm like the guy who played drums. He had like a snare drum and it was really thin. I'm like, oh, that's like like a thin snare drum. So when he hit it, it had this really snappy sound and like really hit hard. And you could hear like it was like this giant warehouse, and he would hit it. But I remember on the head of the drum kit of the snare drum was a donut, and it said donuts. I'm like, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, okay. And I didn't even know the name of the band. I think the first thing I played, they're like, oh, what do you play bass and sing? I said, yeah. So I set up my equipment and this crappy like Carvin amp. It was a piece of shit. And I plugged it in there. We played Minor Threat, the song Minor Threat. We're not the first. That whole song. I was like, you guys know this song? Like, yeah, we know it. And we played it, and it sounded good. But at that point, like I knew they two were like these guys were like elevated talent because at that point, like I knew like bands from Tustin, it'd be like my brother and my brother's friend and some other ones. But like, there's people can play at varying levels, but these guys like particularly were more advanced as musicians. And I just remember like Gary's like wrist tight and just fucking playing hard right away. I'm like, man, this guy can drum and he's like really powerful and kind of angry, which I kind of like. Quiet, but like kind of quiet. He wasn't like loud about it, but you can see there was like an intensity to it. Brian was like an amazing guitar player, and then I later learned like he had been playing for a bit. They were from Corona Del Mar. I just remember just them being really talented, and Dan who could do like finger styling and was like playing like this guy's like a trained like classical guitarist or something. He's like playing this crazy stuff. We hit it off, and I could play bass and sing, and that's what they needed. And they had like a bunch of like fragments of songs, which like a lot of like early bands do. And so they had different parts to songs, and we had like a part that sounded like what was it called? Kung Fu. You know that old video game Kung Fu, where you basically just
Oh, fuck yeah.
yeah, where you're just like hitting butterflies and kicking guys and going left to right, that kind of thing. But there's a part like when in the game, it's like doom da doom doom boom 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 boom. It's kind of like an Iron Maiden beat now that I think about it. It's like doom da doom da doom da doom da doom something like that. So they had this like whole thing. Oh, we had it, but it's based on Kung Fu, so they were playing it, and it was like this harmonized like guitar. Like I'm coming from this like local band where like the guy can barely play a power chord. I mean, no offense, but like that's just what it was. And these two guys are like some sort of like local like Iron Maiden sounding kind of guys. I'm like, oh my god, the hell's happening here? These guys are amazing. They had like a piece of a song here, then like, oh, we have this also, and they had another piece of a song, and they had another piece of a song. So it had like maybe 4, 5, 6 of like pieces of songs. But for some like I don't know, my take on my earliest band experience, which was only dated back like 5 months before any of this, was that Duct Tape Oven. But my concentration was like, yeah, you write, of course you write parts, but like I would write like complete songs. So like even like when I first started with my original band, it was just my brother and Eric. We had like about 10 songs, and I would just write songs from beginning to end and complete them like all the time. Like that's just like what I would do. I wouldn't write just parts. I would like finish the song. So all of a sudden these guys had these like parts, and they were like cool, like a lot of cool ideas. So we turned each of them basically got turned into a song, and then we just started writing songs after that.
Do you remember the first full song you guys wrote together?
Yeah, probably. It was I think it actually was that Kung Fu song. It was it's called Land of the Lost Love. So there's this. You ever see that? Land of the Lost.
Fuck yeah.
Okay, right. So like every morning I'd watch Land of the Lost.
Chaka and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, even when you're watching it back then, like this is like cheesy and campy. Like look at this crap. The Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition. So it's all of a sudden like already like the ballad is like already telling you a story. We take that, and what was it? It was like a absurdist I guess you would describe it. It was like it was about Chaka. Chaka fell in love with Holly, the girl, but it was like forbidden, of course, because of the interspecies thing.
And then the Slee Stacks came in.
Yeah, slowly. But what was it? Land of the Lost Love. They're from two different worlds. Land of the Lost Love. They're from two different worlds. Land of the Lost Love. It's like this kind of like Iron Maiden A part. Oh, and I remember there's like these harmonized guitar parts. Where I think that was a banger. And then I bought a Big Muff distortion pedal. Yeah, and I was kind of like picking that up from there was this guy that I worked with, Mike Rosas. He like worked at the coffee shop with me, and he was in this band called Smile, and they were kind of like this like grunge Nirvana kind of thing, but they were kind of getting on K rock and kind of like a little mini Big Deal. But like I was like getting influenced by because you know like so I was also it wasn't just listening to punk, I was listening to like Mudhoney and like Big Muff, Super Fuzz, and this other crap. So I was like listening to all kinds of stuff. So I was just like picking up whatever I like. So that's why I got like this Big Muff pedal because I just thought it sounded cool. So I got one of those. And I remember that's how the song started. It started with like the Big Muff. It was like, but it's like real deep and heavy. And Gary was playing, I think, a timbale. It was like this crazy sounding like Latin drum thing. So it was like eclectic music. But I'm pretty sure that was like our first song, I think. I would say that was like one of our first songs. But it came from that because there is that kung fu part is somewhere in that song too, and that was like the piece that got used, and then we wrote the rest of it.
Real quick, if you're looking for an explainer video or someone to do motion graphics for your company, check out my company, drive80.com, and you can email me at mike@drive80.com for more info. That's all I got to say. So now back to the interview. When you guys start writing songs, how quickly did you start playing shows?
Pretty quickly.
Did you quit your other band though? Did you just leave your other band and start this one, or did you do both?
I think that band kind of just quit itself. It officially ran out of gas, and no one went to go refuel it. It was like such at like a different level because they had to do with like these guys. They were like I don't know in my mind they were like kind of like what I thought musicians were. I remember when we started talking, I said like yeah when I was a kid you would think like musicians were these like special trained guys and those are the only people that you hear about because they're special trained musicians that are like educated in music and all this other stuff, and they kind of were that. So that was compared to like my Duct Tape Oven Mitt was very extremely lo-fi.
I mean, were you kind of excited though when you started playing with these guys like Donuts and Glory? You're just like, oh, this is real.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, even my brother and Eric, like we were like in awe of them because like they were at like a very different level of musicianship. Because of that, it was just like I started just writing. Like if I was gonna write a song, it was gonna be with them, and then Duct Tape Oven Mitt kind of just fell to the wayside. There was absolutely no conversation about it at all. It just and it was like kind of like obvious. Like the song should be written with these guys because these guys play at this level. And like my Eric and my brother, like it was a very small. We played like 3 shows with the previous band. So yeah, so we just really started playing backyard parties. So Donuts and Glory. It was like it was like an offshoot of just what was going on because there would just be like parties all the time in like Orange and Costa Mesa and Fullerton and Tustin and kind of like central Orange County. So it was always like before any band, they were just like, hey, where's the party? And then you would go to it. And then it became a thing where a band would play at the party. So like, hey, can your band play? So it kind of just was tapping into something that was kind of already there.
That's kind of interesting too, because you think like nowadays if you go to a party, you want to hear some kind of music that people know, or it's like not super fast and aggressive if it's just like a normal party. But for the show, for the scene back then, for where you're going to, it's almost like they wanted that fast SoCal thing happening during the party.
Well, it's interesting. That's actually a good point because what it was the parties. It's like it's like the parties from the movies and stuff. It's like Valley Girl where there's like the punk rockers and the jocks and it was like a microcosm of high school. Like you got to think about it. Like why is that music popular at that time? And while what were the trends at that time? And there was like a lot of kind of like anger and aggression. I'd say. Like why is like metal's like obviously like its hallmark is that it's aggressive, right? And punk rock music is aggressive, and it all goes with like the skateboarding and the running around and drinking. It all go and surfing. It all goes together.
I feel like ska would have been more of a party atmosphere, I guess, 'cause people be jumping up and down kind of thing.
But I was like in Tustin, there's a lot of like at that time there was a like heavy metal was popular, and then more like speed metal and like thrash metal was popular, and then later like grindcore and like death metal and that kind of stuff was popular. And when I say popular, it's like there's like 100 devotees in town that are really into, and it might be different. May have been different like in other towns in Orange County. I'm not exactly sure, but it was just kind of like a thing. It was like a thing to be into like Slayer and like Anthrax and Metallica and all that kind of stuff. So I think the transition to kind of punk rock and kind of more like in the vein of like No Effects and Guttermouth and that kind of stuff. The switch and the change from a kind of thrash and being into metal and being into like that type of punk rock, which is kind of also kind of based on thrash metal to a degree. It's like the Big Lebowski. There's like a time and place. There's a time and place for everything, and that was like the time and place for that.
Yeah.
Was it, well, because like the lyrics, the lyrical content, and all the artwork of all the thrash metal was just like kind of silly, unrelatable, and like humorless, except for Anthrax actually. But it was kind of like humorless. It was kind of like taking itself really seriously, and like it was connected to like pentagrams and like weird stories you hear about people like burning candles and sacrificing cats and like, in the hills. Like, I don't know if you. Where are you from?
I'm from Jersey.
Oh. So you're actually near where I am.
Yeah. Well, this podcast started because I used to play in a band. Actually, I played. I wanted to ask you this in a bit. There's a band we did play with that you guys know. But yeah, I grew up in the Jersey scene, so I just got into the punk rock scene because of a band we started, and I got my eyes open to that. So I'm always asking how people got involved because it's like what was that entry point for someone, and how did that affect them?
So it's interesting because it is connected to this idea of like kind of aggression, kind of being an outsider because it's even in Tustin where I'm from, my introduction to Metallica was Master of Puppets, and it was during my freshman year in football of all things. And I'm in there in the locker room, and there's this enormous like muscle guy named James Rojas, and he has in the locker, and there's like football lockers like with like the open cage so you can kind of see inside the locker. It's like a football locker. And inside on its side was a old like silver Marantz like receiver, like one of those old like 70s receivers. But it was on its side, so it was like already kind of like it like looked like it belonged in the living room, but it was like someone just stuck it in there. And then they would just when we were getting dressed or coming out for practice, he would blast Master of Puppets. And also Appetite for Destruction was also something he was blasting all the time too. But I gravitated more toward the Metallica. Sometimes there's like the whole high school trope of like the football players and then the punkers and the skaters are different group, and then there's the nerds and all this kind of different stuff. But there was like the football players were also very much into like thrash metal into like Metallica and stuff. So it was like thrash metal was like permeating all around through all different strata and different groups of the high school. Punk rock was kind of like much more accessible. I think of it as like folk music. Actually, that's the way I look at it. So if you're like in the mountains or like the Black Forest of Germany in like 1873 or something, there's like some guy with an accordion and wearing lederhosen, and they're playing like their local folk music. And like folk music by definition, folk is people, like the music of the people, and they're not trained. So like square dancing is folk music or any folk music. So that was like I see it as like the folk music of suburban kind of like middle class America.
I feel like that's the first time I've ever heard that analogy on this podcast or in general.
Well, it's interesting though. No, it's interesting because at the same time, I'm going to UC Irvine at the time, so I'm like studying sociology and like kind of like anthropology, but like sociology is my thing. So when we go, when I'm doing it, you're learning about this ethnographic studies, and it's this idea of like a researcher going to live with like the Aborigines in Australia, like kind of just like wearing their clothes and like living with them and studying them that way, right? So there's this thing. So when we started touring, in Donuts and Glory, I had that mindset. I'm like, yeah, what's going on in this? What's going on in this town? I mean, to agree, it sounds like that's what you're doing. Like you're asking origin stories of like, how this came about and how it came about for each person. But I really, really, really was doing this when we would go from town to town, whether we were like in El Paso or Jacksonville, Florida, or Richmond, Virginia. We were going Rock Springs, Wyoming. These are all these different towns we would go to. And there was like a similarity in all of them. And this was like kind of it was like early internet and it was like pre social media. So it was like, before social media, it was very different. The internet was just basically like a kind of like an encyclopedia. That's all it really was. But every time you go to a town, I think I was doing what you were doing. I was kind of like seeing like, hey, what's going on in this town? What are you guys all about? What are you up to? And they were kind of all about the same thing, which was we're kind of bored, but we have a lot of energy and fuck it. And so they're all into like skateboarding and their local record shop and bands and playing shows and zines and that whole thing. So it was like this like folk movement that was like pre-internet, really. Like there was internet, but it was just like not the same thing. Yeah, I think like we booked our tours through Maximum Rock and Roll. They had this like DIY how to tour America book or like
Book your own fucking life.
yeah, exactly. That's it, exactly. So we did that.
Actually, before you guys go on a tour though, but didn't you guys like? I want to just before you get in the road because I want to get into that and everything you're gonna say. But it shows that because you only had 2 releases, and the first one was the EP, the I Can Pee EP. So did you guys have that recorded before you went out on the road, or did you wait until you had the full length too?
Um, Let me think. I think our first tour was already. I think it was already promoting when Pregnasaurs Ruled the Earth. I think the EP was more to like. Well, first of all, it's just what you do. It's like your first entry point into like publishing or producing anything is just like a homemade press. It wasn't homemade. It was like this kid, Pat Laverty, who was a buddy of a guy, a high school buddy of mine named Chris Lundy. And they lived in San Diego, but he was all about the music. So he said, "Hey," he saw us play. Or actually, we played on the boardwalk in Mission Beach in San Diego. Oh, I think we played like one. I think we played one song and got shut down. But in my mind, I still see it as being awesome because it was awesome. We played one song, but it was like just obnoxiously just right on the boardwalk at full volume. We have a picture with the cops. But yeah, he put out he's like, "Oh, I can finance a 7-inch." Like finance a 7-inch? Sure, let's do it. So we recorded it and pressed it and then we did the artwork.
Which is interesting too, because you guys are promoting like the flyer you have now is that same logo that you have on that 7-inch.
Oh yeah, that early. It was like a Gary early logo. There was like it's like we got like an old encyclopedia and like ripped it through, and it's as if it's supposed to look like Crispin Glover's like scratching his way out of the back of the record.
Oh my God, you're right. That is, yeah. I've seen it on Discogs. I was like, whose face is that? It's like that is Crispin Glover. Yeah.
Well, Crispin Glover, like I became like a big Crispin Glover fan, and then he has like this thing called a publishing company called Volcanic Eruptions. So it was like run out of L.A. And like I think I wrote to him. I wrote like a letter to him. So I was like kind of a fan. So I just put that in there just randomly. The 7-inch is cool because like you bring it to record stores and you try to you get it into record stores. So you start to it's like the process of legitimizing the band, right? Like, oh, we have 7-inches in local record stores. Like that's cool. So there was just like a means of promoting the band. But I think that was all done pre any touring. And I think the very first tour was already promoting when Pregnasaurs Ruled the Earth. We toured like four times. We went up and down like the West Coast 2 times, and then we went back and forth the distance to the East Coast 2 times as well.
Which of those tours was with Boxcar from New Jersey? That was the band I was mentioning before.
Yeah, I do remember them. I don't know, man. It was definitely. Was it in Texas?
I think so. I think it was in Austin or
I think it was the first one. We played with what was it called? 30-Foot Falls, I think we played with.
Yep, yeah.
In Houston. I do remember that. That was like a bigger show actually.
Yeah, they were from there, I think, and they were on Fearless at the time.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, I think that was the first back and forth. But man, I did not keep track of. I don't know if I have journals from back then. Maybe I do.
Your memory is pretty solid for like just remembering just names and places and things like that.
My memory's good, but I actually like from about I would say like 18 on, I kept a journal. So I have like a pile of journals. I can't remember. They're like in the storage unit or something. But I have like I would say like 3 feet, if you can measure it in feet, of journals. So I could look through there, and I probably would learn a lot from that time period because I was writing like all the time, just journal stuff.
Did someone tell you to do that, or did you just go, you know what, I should document this?
Who told me was have you ever seen Biloxi Blues?
Oh yeah, yeah. Matthew Broderick's character, he was.
Yes. Neil Simon, Matthew Broderick, but I think Matthew Broderick is Neil Simon in the like he's like playing the role of Neil Simon kind of. And if you remember, there's a time where they're in the barracks or whatever. Someone broke into his Foot Locker.
Yeah, the big tall jerk guy or whatever.
Yes, exactly. The muscle jock guy, and he breaks in there and he busts it out. And then Matthew Broderick's like, no, don't read my journal. That's personal. And then one of these like scenes from a movie where the two guys are holding him back. It's like, no, don't read that. It's like reading through it, and he starts reading it out loud and reciting and reading what Matthew Broderick wrote. He's like accuses of the snivelly like Jewish kid with the glasses of being like, I think he's a latent homosexual. And the other guy's like, oh. Then he talks about the jock guy, who's like maybe like a Polish last name or something, and he's talking about him, and he's like, the guy is reading about himself, about what Matthew Broderick, and he reads it, and he's like, this guy's a numbskull, he's an idiot, he doesn't care about anything, but if we were in war, I would want to be in a foxhole with him because he's like the fiercest warrior, and I respect him the most when it comes to that. And the guy's like, oh, what is this? But you could tell like with his face, like he was like kind of touched by it, the big guy.
Yeah, I don't know.
And he throws it down, and then afterwards, Matthew Broderick says, it was in that moment that I realized the power of writing. You can think stuff, but the second you put pen to paper and you write it down, it takes on a greater gravity, and it means a lot more to people when they see it in writing. And I'm all, yeah, that's cool. So I basically kept a journal thereafter.
That's awesome. I love that. Actually, just to kind of sneak it in real quick, and I don't want to talk about myself, but I kept a journal too when I was on the road, and it actually got me in trouble because one time we were in Florida, we went to a strip club, and I wrote about it. And my girlfriend at the time, I went to get food or something. I came back and she's like, just sitting there blank face. I was like, what? She's like, I read your journal and I read about a strip club. I go, well, that's on you because you read that and I didn't tell you to read it. So I'm like, I'm like, you're at fault here.
But that really that's cool though. I mean, that's why I kept a journal since then though. It's for you too, obviously. It's for yourself. And you write it because it's the act of getting it out, but then there's the act of it takes on greater gravity and you're able to kind of sort through it and understand it and like reflect on it more if it's written. I would actually, after this, I probably will go find those journals and maybe I'm going to do some research and read about it because like the weird thing about it also is like it also helps you store memories better.
Mm-hmm.
Because the act of doing it, it's like it's like not only you experienced it, but you writing about it, you're reflecting on it again. So you're kind of like watching it 2 times already, if not 3 times.
Yeah, I actually took photos. I took photos all the time on tour, so it was kind of like my journal. So exactly, like your memory, it's either writing or photos, or merely locks it in.
Yeah, because it was like at that point when all that shit's been written for Jonathan Gloria, like I'm very much like in a contemplative thinking poetically kind of. That's like how I was thinking about things. I was like reading a lot of books, like it's like coming of age. I was like 19, 20, 21, and I'm hanging out with like people that aren't punk rockers. I was hanging out with people from the coffee shop actually. They're all like partying and reading and staying up all night, hanging out all night.
I know. I was like, I'm hearing a lyric right now in that song.
No, but that's actually specifically about a place. Like that's like what we would do. We would hang out all night long.
Was it with my friends? That's all right.
Yeah, exactly. But an island of concrete, a couch in a tower, a day with a minute. That's actually literally that island of concrete is that backyard, and it was like a concrete patio.
Do you think that, because it kind of hit me that you're writing and you're journaling, you're reading, how much of that is affecting the lyrics that you're writing for the full length?
100%, man. Oh my God, you crazy? It's like that's what it is. I'm also reading like I'm into like Charles Bukowski poems. I'm reading a lot of at that time. Just like the meter and the rhythm and the imagery and just like that's just punk rock, man. Jack Kerouac. I'm reading like the beat books, on the road, and at the same time I'm reading Comet Bus. Are you familiar with Comet Bus at all?
Nah.
Comet Bus is the drummer for Crimpshrine, and he put out a zine called Comet Bus, and his name's Aaron Comet Bus, and I guess he lives down the street from me now. It's like friends of a friend. He would write about his like travels and his kind of like stuff he would do. Like he was like busking in Europe in like 1986, and you're like reading about him like hopping trains and doing all this beatnik, nouveau beatnik kind of stuff. And I'm reading about all that stuff. So I'm like really getting into that whole kind of like discover yourself, discover America, discover the world, get out there and just do stuff. I'm reading like Kurt Vonnegut and Herman Hesse and reading all this kind of like philosophical stuff. But I'm also hanging out with like a lot of people that aren't into like they're not into punk rock. They're into like Neil Young and like James Brown and like we're playing music like they're playing music and they're playing their music and like dancing all night and just like blasting James Brown and just like a lot of that's what I was doing. So like I was into so all like the lyrical content and like what I'm thinking about is all woven into this like 90s kind of like beatnik artist kind of thing, I guess. But then also the main thing is also to not take yourself seriously because then you're an asshole.
Well, I was gonna say that because I had a note that or a question I wrote down where because the songs themselves, I mean, they're like super fast and they're like musically like complicated and things like that, and your voice is very. It almost sounded like you guys made kind of like this. The songs themselves sound kind of like a snottiness to them.
Yes, because it has to do with like not taking yourself seriously.
That's where I was leading it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a nod to like classically trained musicians. Because if you're singing over those songs with like no grit, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. It does sounds gutless. I don't know if you're like so familiar with I keep bringing them up because I guess I'm really influenced by them. But like Crimpshrine.
I never got into them, but I knew them, and and I remember like Green Day was like, weren't they like influenced by them or something?
Yeah, no, they're from like the same like time and place. They're all from like Berkeley, 1985 to like 1989 kind of
Yeah.
people. It does like what a lot of like the music that I like, which is pop element to it, right? So like you can kind of like hum the tune, and there's like a melody to it, right? But there's something also at the same time. There's something off about it. There's something weird about it, and something that's like makes it edgier because otherwise it's just like bubblegum. Like I don't like that. It's like too square. And but then if you get too abstract and too out there, then it's just like inaccessible. And like popular music is popular for a reason. It's because there's something pleasing about it. Like there's something that captures you, whether it's the melody or whatever it is. But if that's all you got, then you're a square. But then if all you have is like abstract noise, then you're just like you think you're first of all you probably don't have the chops to like even like carry a tune and like sing happy birthday. So you make up for it by just like, oh, I don't like that stuff. I just like creating like crazy noise abstraction or whatever. And that can take many forms. But like I mean, a band that I really love is the Pixies, and the Pixies pretty much follow that formula of like this is like pop music for sure because there's something pleasing about the melody, etc., and like the dynamics, etc. But there's also something like wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like what it means to be like like for me that's like a cool person. It's like a person that is like you can identify with, someone that's not too cool for school, but at the same time there's like an edge. There's something a little bit off and wrong, but not so wrong where it's disturbing, but not so too square where it's it's like it's this a balance.
Yeah, that totally defines to me the sound of your album, man. I don't know, like when Pregnasaurs Ruled the Earth, like that to me, like you just defined the sound of that record.
Well, that's right because that's where it came from. Like it is a time. It's a product of everything, but it's also a product of like Gary's experience. Like the reason why it is what it is, and they always say like the drummer is like kind of the main guy because without that, it's the feel, and if that's not hitting right, it's not going to be what it is. Gary's life experience, whatever it is, it made it so when he hit that drum, you could feel it.
See, that's funny because in his interview, he's like kind of self-deprecating about his drums because he's like, everyone's doing their thing and I'm just doing a straight beat and I just notice I'm doing the same fill all the time.
I heard him say that, but he's like, yeah, but you know what? It's not because someone can okay, for any music you can do the notation on a piece of paper, right? So whatever Philly's doing, you could write it out. You can have 100 people play it, and I can tell you which one's Gary. So whatever, man. Like you're playing something basic, but you played it your way, and that's what it is.
I think it's good because the way he said that, especially the entire interview, he's like, I don't know, he's like, I'm not remembering a lot of stuff. He's like, you really gotta get Freddie on, and he's gonna remember all these things. So it's like, but he, like I said, he held the torch to the band. He really had a love for it, and he held on to it, and now it's like his dream, I believe, is coming true because you guys are playing the show. But it sounded like he was kind of, like I said, self-deprecating, and he talks about on tour he kind of partied a bit too much, and he felt like he was the downfall of the band and stuff. And it's cool to hear you talk positively about him.
Actually now I recollect hearing that, and like he was not the downfall of anything.
We'll get to
And
that.
truthfully, actually, when I remember like, Gary told me that it existed, so I listened to it, and then I heard him say that, and I felt sad because from my perspective, that wasn't correct thinking. Like that was not the downfall of the band. Nothing Gary did. It had to do with time and place, and like where I was with myself. I had worked a job for about 5 years. I was in college. I had a girlfriend at the time, and all three of those things ended all at the same time. College ended. I quit the job. Relationship ended, and it's like that lends itself to page turning in your life. Gary could have done this, that, and the other. Those things were happening to me when with whatever Gary was doing, that was just what was happening personally with me. There's a degree of like inevitability about that. Like that's where I was. That's what was happening. I kind of got what he was saying. Like everyone has their own perspective on things, of course, but like mine, like I in my brain, in my heart, and Gary gets no credit for ending the band in any. I mean, it's like he didn't do anything that made that stuff was going to happen one way or the other to me.
Two things. How did you perceive you guys getting along internally and on the road? And second, did you want the band to get big before all those three things ended?
I think there was. What was the first part of the question?
Well, how'd you guys get along internally on the road?
Seemingly good. I mean, as it should be. I think like the main thing is like the music and playing the music. That's like obviously that's why you're around each other, and that's why you're in a band together. That's why you're touring around for the music. The music was always fantastic. We had like a great way of playing with each other. I mean, we would practice a lot. Like we would do stretches in that paper factory. I remember we would play like I'd get off of work and we would play for like I don't know, it seemed like 8, 9, 10 hours. Lay out in the parking lot, take a break, and then start playing some more. Because first of all, everyone in there in the band is like a music maniac, unending love for music. We would just keep practicing and practicing. Like I guess you could call it perfectionist, but like that's like not how I don't. That's not how we thought. But what I'm saying though is like you're talking more like interpersonal relationships and like how we got along when we weren't playing music. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, like the behind the scenes.
Seemingly fine. I mean, everyone has like different personalities. Like I'm pretty extroverted, and Gary and Brian to a degree, I would say are like more introverted for sure. We come from suburban America, so there's like or just America in general. There's a degree of like of passive aggressiveness, I guess you could characterize some of the interaction because that's kind of like it's especially at that age.
And how old are you guys at this point again? You're like what, 19 to 22 or something?
Yeah, exactly. Which is insane because, like, you at the time you think you're an adult, which I guess kind of you officially are, but like, my God.
No, you're not. Did you ever talk to like a 22-year-old lately?
Oh my God, it's insanity. It's like talking to a 12-year-old.
Yeah. I deserve all these things. Shut the fuck up.
Right. I don't know. That's a whole.
That's my hot take. Yeah.
Sorry, 22-year-olds, but whatever. Like, also, like, we're dudes. Like, we're not getting too. It was like less touchy feely back then. It was like there was some of that. Speaking of like young people now, there this whole, like, I don't know what you would call it, spirituality or like kind of progressive thinking or openness to different things. Like, that's like it's different now because it's like gone a whole generation of that's just kind of more embedded into American culture. And back then, being open and talking about your feelings, like, it existed, but it was like not where it is now. And I was like, especially like if you're like in college and stuff, like, a lot of times like these ideas emanate from like researchers in college and universities, and they start talking about it, but then it catches wave like in little circles and like these kind of areas in America, but then it spreads out to the popular culture over time. But there's a big lag between the time the person comes up with this like theory and then when like the everyday American is thinking about this stuff too. It can be like 20 years. So it's kind of these things existed, like this idea of like being real open with your feelings and saying, what's the I'm traumatized.
Yeah, everyone has trauma and like everyone has trauma.
Right. Everything. It's a series of traumas.
Yeah, and I'm like, just fucking relax, man.
It's like,
It's
oh,
like,
my life is
Jesus
just a
Christ.
chain of traumas of different sizes. It's just like absurd.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
But I mean, I went. There's definitely like, it wasn't like, it seemed to have just been like kind of like the relationships that I had with like a lot of people at that age. I mean, I don't know. People have different experiences. I mean, I know that Gary's life experience and Brian's life experience and Dan too was very very different than mine. I mean, and another thing was like I was like a little bit older, not much by the way. And now it's like seems like insane that like but when someone's 21, the other person's 19, that's like a difference back then. Obviously now it's like who cares? We're very much from the same era. In a way that kind of played into like the dynamic of the relationships back then too. It was like I was a little bit older. I was like buying beer for them. Maybe I don't know if you need to cut that one out. There might be a statute of limitations of me buying beer for someone in 1994.
I doubt it. You got like cops showing up at your door. You're like, son of a
Yeah, cops show
bitch.
up. It's like, oh, we heard you bought some beer at Circle K in Costa Mesa in 1994. You're under
Well,
arrest.
don't give him too many details. Jesus, man. Gotta let him work for it.
It was on Superior Avenue or whatever there in Costa Mesa.
I think like one of the reasons I think kind of lead into the other question of when you're on the road, because taking what you just said, right, and where you're at mentally inside when you're on the van and the road, but also there's the internal part of of being on the road and like you have all that time to think in between shows, and then it's like you guys just like you also have to get along with two other people, whatever how many other people if you have roadies and stuff like that, and then you get the show, and then there's the mentality of just playing the set, and it's like you just live in the moment when you're playing a set, and then the future wise you think about where's this thing going to go, and
Oh, right.
so like
Yes.
some people add pressure to the band because they want it to be so big, and I'm just kind of theorize here based on after the
Oh,
band you
right.
traveling and get for 5 years, it's like I'm thinking your experience that you had on the road was you wanted to kind of be like on the road Kerouac and just really live life, and maybe that was the bigger goal than being like we're going to become this
Yes.
big band.
Yes. Okay, because yeah, now I kind of I think I'm understanding more the nature of the question because there is this thing like when we're a small band and we're playing these like backyard shows, and then okay, we want to get into a club, let's play. Okay, we start playing showcase theater all the time. We start playing these other venues all the time. And we're starting to gain like little tiny following, and then we go. So it's like it's all about trajectory, right? It's like okay, this goes here, and like we're moving on up. And then I kind of said when we ended, it's like Seinfeld ended because he said he wanted to reach the peak, but he didn't want to go toward the end where it's like, you should have been canceled like 3 years ago, but you kept going. But for us, we quit before we were about to take off. So it's not this. It's the analogy is not good because Seinfeld had his early years where like the show wasn't really popular, but then it caught on, and then he retired before they fizzled out and got too old. We quit before we reached any kind of like it was about to happen. Like we actually were there actually, because like I said, people were calling us, and people were like, oh, like I remember like, oh, you can go on tour, but like that is just not where my mindset was. Reading what I was reading, and kind of like getting into like kind of Eastern philosophy and if not spirituality. So listening to this guy, Alan Watts, who's like this Zen Buddhist, and I'm getting into this kind of stuff too. And that's very like selfless kind of stuff, and it really, in its way, is like the most punk rock because it does not care about what other people think. And part of like gaining quote unquote success of like I don't know, like what would have happened to us if we continued on, like if you just follow like what the natural trajectory would be if a band starts gaining greater success around 1996 and 1997. We start touring around. We probably Liberation Records was probably fizzling out at that point. We probably would have got picked up by another bigger label. Probably we would have produced more. We would have made friends with bigger bands. We probably would have gone on one of these tours, right, with the other bands, right? And probably, I mean, that's kind of how at that time. I mean, you probably know more than me. I kind of because at that point I ducked out.
I mean, I think you're nailing it. Like that's the
Right, like the Warp Tour or something like that. Like we would have been one of those. Probably would have been one of those bands. I mean, that's what it looked like to me. But you got to understand, like at that time, I'm absolutely 100% not thinking about any of that. I'm like in a hut in Thailand on an island with a candle, like writing a poem and like staring off in the distance and like eating like a fish and just walking, counting the shells on the beach and like kind of reading books and like just by myself. And that's where I personally like was. That's where I needed to be. And so I didn't have like I never had this mentality or feeling ever about like missing the boat or missing an opportunity because I like specifically put in a lot of work to gear my life to be by myself. So it's like I did not experience any like regret like whatsoever. It's like the opposite. I accomplished what I wanted to do with myself at that exact time. It does sound counter to a person in a band whose dream and trajectory is to like reach the stratosphere and I'm not downing it at all because there's something cool about that because now your lyrics, your words, and your music get to more people. Like that's also amazing and super cool. It's just not where I was at that time.
well, kind of taking what you said, right? The sound you guys have at that point was not quite, not totally Fat Records, not like you had the fast pace and stuff like that, but I think even with Garrett was talking about it, I was like, you guys were kind of below that, not in like a negative way, but there was like this midpoint of being, the slow emo band, and then there's the ska poppy band, and then there's like Fat Records beat, and I think you guys were kind of in your own thing, I thought.
Well, we really, really, really started changing at the end. I don't know if you heard, you probably didn't hear any of it, but like after that, we existed, after when Pregnasaurs Ruled, we probably existed for like another year or so, or more maybe even. I really don't even know the dates, man. I got to look back at that. I'm
Well, it
not
says
sure.
96 is when you released that record, so that might help you.
Okay, so I would have to like look back at that, but we wrote probably about maybe 5, 6 more songs after when Pregnasaurs Ruled the Earth. And they're very different. And at that point, I was listening to I was influenced by Pinkerton, that Weezer album. I was listening to that a lot, and I'm like, this is like the best album I've ever heard. And just like the whole sound and like this kind of like it did that thing of like being poppy and popular with its melodies and stuff, but then it was like doing some like kind of wacky melodic musical stuff. And I started from that, and then like Brian was like listening to like Mr. Bungle and so it was like we started writing these like songs that were like totally different, a different influence. was also, I would say, like influenced by like I Spy, that band I Spy. So it was like this. We started writing these songs that had like it went like intro, verse, chorus, weird part, over. It like didn't repeat anything. I started writing these songs that didn't repeat. But the idea was that like if the part's cool, it would be like interesting, if even if it didn't repeat. Because like the formula obviously is to always repeat stuff and have a pattern. But it was like we started like that's kind of like how our songs started sounding. So we wrote like maybe like about 4 or 5 songs that followed what I just said, which is like not a pattern I've ever even heard any band do. It's like an unpopular thing to not have like repeated pattern.
I almost appreciate that though, because it makes you want more when you hear songs like that though.
Right, because if the parts are good, then you hear it, then the only way you're gonna get it is if you just listen to it again.
Yeah.
It's so sonically cool and interesting that you want to like listen to it again. So I'll tell you, I mean, I listen to our music and I listen to our albums like especially as I have 2 young sons now and they got into it. So now I can listen to it all the time, which is kind of sounds crazy, but I do.
Of your own stuff.
Yeah, because because I like it.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the point, man. If you don't like your own stuff, you can't listen to it and appreciate it. Then
Well, that's why you wrote it. You wrote it because you heard stuff that you liked, that you wanted to do your own version because you wanted to do it like the way that you like it.
do you think you would have progressed in the sound that would have matched the early 2000s where everything changed?
Um, I have, I kind of a little bit have no idea because I was not paying attention to anything at that point. I was like, oh man, I was like not thinking about any, like I am no pop culture or music historian of 2000 to 2012 or like right, that's like a vacuum for me. Like I don't know much about what was going on. So I don't know. I can't answer that question properly, but I do know this. I know that we were onto something cool. Like when we stopped, I really really liked what we were writing our last few songs after when Pregnasaurs Ruled the Earth. We brought in this keyboard. We're actually going to play a couple of those songs at the show. Actually, a couple of them, and they were like I mean, I was really liking the direction they were going. I was listening to I heard like Rick Rubin talking on online. He's like a little clip of him talking, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm never trying to write hits. I'm just writing literally. I'm just writing what I like. If you really stay true to that, and you have a degree of like good taste of some sort, other people are gonna like it. But in the end, you're writing it for yourself. So I knew that like when we were writing those songs after when Pregnant Was Rule the Earth, there was like a handful of those songs. Like I really liked them. I thought they were really like cool, interesting songs. And I could see like pursuing that and that would have grown into something cool and different, but like quality. And because of that, especially like with the internet blowing up and then especially with social media blowing up, it would find its audience one way or the other because like it just would get out there and there's just enough human beings on earth that would be appealing to. Because it was appealing to me, and even though I quote unquote unique, there's thousands of people like me, I'm sure.
Thousand greatest fans, like Tim Ferriss always talks about. That's all you need. Yeah, man. I mean, it kind of sounds like. I mean, because when I heard about you guys, a buddy of mine, he picked up your CD at a local record shop, and he played it. He's like, yeah, this guy Alan who worked behind the counter, who we all respected because his music taste was like great, and he really taught us about a lot of stuff. He's like, yeah, check out this band, Donuts and Glory. And so this guy Steve gets it and he plays it for me, and we're like, "What the fuck is this?" And I was like, "I don't know." But he would just play it all the time, and we just like loved it. But then there was no way to see you guys but then there was this whole mystery about you guys because there was you just disappeared. I always had wondered why, hence why I reached out to you guys and got like Gary to talk about it, and now you get to talk about it. But like accidentally by you guys stopping when you did, just because circumstance, it did create this mythos, I guess, of like, what happened to this fucking band? Like, and people would like be like, Joe be like, oh, I fucking remember that band. Like, what happened? They're like, we don't know. And now I think that's one of the things that helped sell out that show so fast is because people didn't get to have, like, as soon as like you said, you guys got more known after you broke up. And now people have been waiting for so long, and now they're like, "Holy shit, we actually get to have this." So no pressure.
No, it's funny because like again, I don't feel pressure, but I will prepare. And I practice the songs like all the time. Like I practiced them this morning. I practiced yesterday. I can practice like every day. But in part, it has to do with because like I just like it. I love it. That's why I'm doing it. But also, it's like we're gonna play the. I think about like should we write like a new song? That'd be kind of weird.
Sure. Why not?
What is it? What if we just like, hey guys, like we have 3 new songs, and everyone go like, what?
I mean, I will say that if I go to see a band that I haven't seen in forever, and they're like, "We're gonna play a bunch of new stuff," I'm like, "Nope, no, play the stuff I want to hear." Like until I
No, we'll
can
play
hear
all the
that stuff.
shit. We'll play all the stuff, but it's like I don't know. And in the end, again, like I really like in a way. I don't know. It's like it's the part of it is like being free to just do whatever you want. And if we wanted to do that, it's like I wouldn't even think twice about like what people think or care. Like, I don't care. I would just I mean not that I don't care what you think, but it's like what you feel or think about it's not going to dictate like what I do.
I mean, nowadays it's like, why wouldn't you do that? You have such way. You guys are planning on practicing virtually, which was not even a thing 20 years ago.
Right.
You could try it, and if it sucks, then you don't do it.
I mean also like I don't know. We'll see where it goes. I don't want to like oh speak out of line or like I don't know. I didn't even talk to Gary or Brian about it. Who knows?
No, I was gonna say, like, I mean, there is gonna be a giant difference between, like, right now, right? There's the excitement of practicing for the show, and there's that, ooh, it's like you're going to a party that you're excited for, and you're thinking about how the party's gonna go, and once you're there, it's nothing like you thought, and it could be great. In this case, it'd be like better than you thought. I don't know how long you guys are gonna play for. I guess like maybe an hour or 45 minutes or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
That whole pocket right there, the moment you guys get on stage, that thing you're gonna feel is something you can't even prepare for, like right now. So that's going to define something different for you in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yes. And the second thing is like we kind of had a moment like that when we practiced with each other like last month. Because fuck, we been playing with each other for all that time, and then we just hit it, and it was like it was great. But it was also kind of like it was definitely, and the word gets overused, but surreal. Did I answer your question of like kind of you were trying to get to like some sort of origin or understanding? Because you just kind of went over that. Is it been pieced together?
Yeah, to me it feels like we accomplished that. We got there.
Cool.
The funny thing is that just from I think the cool part is from talking to Gary and seeing how it seems like he's wanted this to happen for a really long time, and there was nothing else out there that I saw that was documented of you or Brian talking about this. So someone messaged me, I think like a month ago. He was like, "Hey, just to let you know, Donuts and Gloria, they're practicing right now. There's a reunion in the works." And I was like, "Oh shit, dude, that's awesome." And then Gary had messaged me and like told me about it, and I was like, "Yeah, I heard about it." And I was like, "This is so cool to hear that." And I was surprised. I guess what I'm getting to is that I thought that you and Brian would be less interested in doing it, but now talking to you, it sounds like there's this excitement in your voice, which is
Oh
like
yeah.
awesome.
But the thing is this, it's like the reason why we didn't play earlier is because like I wasn't interested. Because I was just like, I came out to living in actually I mentioned it before, into the Bay Area around 2001, 2002, and I was there and I went to grad school and stuff. But then I moved out to New York in 2006 and like, I was a teacher and moved up and et cetera, et cetera. So I've like been doing it here for like about 20 years almost. So like I'm kind of like almost like moving toward like the end of my my education career in a way, because how long can this go for? When that was happening, it's like that was all about like I'm moving to New York, and like that consumed my everything. Because in a way, like this playing this show is like kind of a reflective kind of thing, and it's like kind of closing a circle in a way. But you can't really close a circle if that's just not where you are in your life. You know what I mean? Because like when I came out here in 2006, it's like super fresh, and I'm like I live in New York City, man. This is like it is what it is as advertised. It's insanity. There's like it's like a huge world, and I'm new to it. I'm not like in reflective mode. I'm in like projection mode. But now, I've been married for like 10 years. I got 3 sons now, and the last one was born like 3 months ago. And so that like puts you kind of more in a different place. It's not that like I dislike the band. No, I never disliked it at all. I never even had bad ideas about it, but because it wasn't where I was. It does have a lot to do with my sons. Like I played somehow, like they got into to thrash metal. I mean, not somehow, through me, but but they like heard Slayer, they heard Metallica, like the early Metallica stuff, and they started liking it. So my sons hold a couple of the traits that I have, which is like obsessiveness and like into and then they got into Slayer, Metallica, and then they started getting into Donuts and Glory because they heard it, and then they really started getting into it. So they like sing along and they can play it. They play instruments and they can play some songs and sing along with it. And because of that, I just kind of rode the wave with them because they were getting it fresh for the first time. So I kind of like got like a rebirth of like getting into this music again. So like that's why like I wasn't listening like from 2000 to about 2021. I was not listening I would listen to it every once in a while for Donuts and Glory, but I wasn't really listening to it. It was just like I had it in my heart, in my mind, but I wasn't like actively listening to it. But for the last like year, especially the last year, I've been listening. So that made it so when, I don't know how it happened, but Gary started floating the idea again some more. It resonated more with me. It seemed more like, and then also like, so my sons can hear it.
So they're going to be at the show then?
Oh yeah,
Oh hell yeah,
for sure.
How old are your older sons? Your two older sons?
9 is the oldest, 7, and then 3 months.
Oh wow, that's cool, man. A 9 and 7-year-old just in the crowd or on the stage watching you guys play.
Oh, but they're like really, but that clearly like had an effect on like me saying yes because they're into it. But then it's not just because like I want to show my kids playing the music, but it's like because they got into it, I got like a rebirth of listening again myself to the music, and then kind of just liking it and getting into it and getting into that mindset. So when Gary brings it up again, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll do it for sure.
When you said yeah, you'll do it, what was his reaction?
I don't know. It was like on the computer, so I didn't see a face or anything.
He wrote like all caps. Really?
No, but it had been floated like before too, and I kind of was like warming up to it even before. But yeah, I mean, for one thing, I live out here, so it's like it's impractical in lots of ways. Kind of the timing worked out, and I'm in schools and stuff, so I have like summers off, and then I happen to be going to my dad's 90th birthday thing. So like, I'm like, yeah, like I can see the timing work here. So that's why, I said yes to it.
Is like one of the reasons too why you're doing this? I'm gonna start wrapping this up soon, but one of the reasons why you're doing it too is because you said you're coming on to you're not end, but you're coming up to 20 years of teaching or being in the school system, education system. And do you feel like there's this like next thing? You're like, what's the next thing? You're like, oh, like doing this is just, I don't know, it's opening a doorway of what the next possibility is for me.
Yeah, to keep it simple, the answer is yes. But of course, there's lots of layers there. But it does have to do with you don't really want to reflect and go back. And going back and reflecting, going back is not going backward as like a person, but like to reflect on things. You're not so as reflective when you're like fresh and new in a new place. Like I said, when I got here to New York, 2006, I'm like, I'm starting a career. This is my career now, and I'm in a new place that's like extreme, right? So all of my trajectory and energy was like pushing forward and upward. So at that point, to go backward and to reflect on and like do some band stuff about like stuff that happened in like the not so distant past, which was Donuts of Glory back then. Like that's not where I was. But now that like when you start saying like you've done a job of for like pushing 20 years, it'll be like my 19th year next year. It's like that's like an impressive number. Like makes you think 20 years, and then you think to yourself, 20 years seem like nothing. Like you blink your eyes a couple of times and that was 20 years ago, right? A couple of t-shirts ago, right? But then you think to yourself, now you're like on the the time continuum, and you're thinking to yourself, in 20 years, I'll be like legit an old fucking dude, and I'm gonna look back in there and I'm like, oh my god, I'm old, but like I still think about like BMX and Hulk Hogan and Christian Hosoi, and my fucking brain's in 1987 still.
Hulk Hogan. What a great reference.
No, but like I'm like the algorithm thinks that like I'm somehow like a professional wrestling like baby historian now because the algorithm keeps sending me like professional wrestling because I watched the video one time and now like I know everything about like wrestling and I know everything about skateboard like get all these like old skateboarding Bones Brigade shit and like BMX like it's like it's coming home to roost.
Yeah.
It's like this middle age like they find out what you want and it's like the computer just starts playing you with like all these movies and stuff from that era and like it's crazy because like I'm like I'm like a 1986 to 1997 like historian now because I keep getting sent all this stuff.
Wait, is that in the YouTube? Is that doing it?
Yeah, no, it's just like like an algorithm of like the reels that get sent to you on your phone
Yeah.
like for social media, and it just keeps sending you stuff. So like it's like never ending supply of like all the shit that you liked a little bit. Now they just keep sending. You just never and I do like it, but in 20 years I'll be fucking old. Like really, there's no way you can't talk your way out of it. Like you are officially very, very old. I think it's different now to like a person. I'm 50 years old, which is like insane to me. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people. I know all the people my age talking to everyone. It's like there's a lot of like man boys running around that are like old, but like their mindset is like back in the day.
I mean, this is the whole fucking podcast.
Yeah, exactly right. So we would see that, like, I remember when I was a kid, you would see, like, oh, the guy's like a Vietnam veteran. You're like, oh, shit. Oh, he, like, saw the Doors play or something. Like, oh, my God. And you would think, like, oh, my God, look at this guy. His hair, like, he's got, like, the Tony Danza hair, the hair over his ears, and this fucking guy's, like, stuck in the 70s. And you just kind of look at him and kind of, like, think they're kind of, like, what's that, Uncle Rico kind of people,
Yeah.
And, like, that's a little bit what I am. I'm like a 90s guy.
Dude, I get hit with all these Instagram things from like GI Joe. This guy has his GI Joe account where he like he'll either show them in the packages or he'll like put him in this like jungle in his backyard or something in like positions of fighting, and I fucking love it. I'm like, oh man, is that Storm Shadow? Holy shit, I fucking love that.
Oh, you gotta get two. You gotta keep one for the collectors in the package, and then you have an unopened one where you can just like abuse it and like play with it old school style.
Yeah, like take them apart, give them different heads and stuff like that. Someone taught me that back in the day. All right, cool, man. Well, I'm gonna start wrapping this up. Before I ask the last two questions, is there a story you'd like to tell that you've never told before, and you'd like to tell it now?
Oh my God, that's like a whole other interview.
I know this throws everyone for a loop every time.
I mean, there's so many crazy stories, man. I would say like from Donuts and Glory, of course, right? You're talking about. I would say two, and I'm gonna tell like truncated versions. Two, I'll tell a few, but I'll tell them quick. One would be we played in an old mining cave outside of Las Vegas, and it was a show there in an old mining cave, and it was like this, like outside the desert there. It's like all red. It's all these big fucking red rocks. But we go there at night, and it's like it's straight out of like like in the Terminator when they go show like the future and like the skulls are being crushed by the machines and like the kids like getting you think they're watching TV, but it's really like a broken TV with a fire in it. That kind of like a post-apocalyptic. So it definitely has that vibe in there. And there's like a VW bus that's like gutted out with a fucking bonfire inside of it. I think we played with was it Boba Fett Youth? Was that the band that we played with? But anyways, we played the show, and I totally remember it. And it was a scene out of like a post-apocalyptic movie. And we played in there, and we just started playing. And I remember like the dust flying up, and the dust getting all over my shoes, and the big muff pedal, and everyone just going crazy in there. And that was like super awesome. That was really cool. But it was like dark, and then we like slept in the van, and then we woke up the next day, and it's like all too bright, and we drank and all that stuff. We're with these like like we're friends with all them. We're like kind of like a beach band, so a lot of the friends, especially the other guys' friends, are all from like Newport and like Costa Mesa and Corona del Mar. So there's like these like real like Spicoli type guys, but they're like skateboard, Spicoli, surfer, punk rock kind of guys. I remember they were these guys that we would hang out with, and I remember we wake up in the morning and then they just start wreaking havoc, and it was like it definitely was like Jackass before Jackass. Like that shit was happening before everybody knew about that, but it was like that mentality. They started like throwing stuff off the cliff because of this cliff. There was a cliff, and they were pushing like a. We had a barbecue, and I remember like we threw the barbecue off the cliff, and it went tumbling down into the rocks, and they were just like going crazy. And what was this guy's name? Tanner. This guy named Tanner. He was like in a band that was in a band that played near us. He's like, I'm going on an Easter egg hunt, except for I'm looking for old smokes and beers. He was like finding half beers and drinking them, and old cigarettes and smoking them.
Oh God.
So that was like but it's like a memory of like pure like crazy debauchery and just kind of like craziness. So that was one. Another one was like we went to it was called Rock Springs, Wyoming, and we pull up into the town, and like a lot of times your entry point, and you kind of mentioned it, is like the local like punk rock record shop. So we pull up to it, like, hey, where are we playing? And they're like, oh, you're supposed to play in like the Veterans Hall. We're like, okay. So we go to the Veterans Hall, and there's like some like old like fat dudes like with a dolly bringing in kegs. Like, you're not playing here tonight. You're not booked for here tonight. We're like, what? So the kids from town, that's when like the kids from town, like the punk rock skateboard kids from town, all gather around. Like, we got a place for you to play. You can play on the flatbed of a truck. And we're like, and they're like, oh no, you can play in a park. So they took us to like this park. And so we set up, but we have no electricity. So we set up in this gazebo, this like standalone gazebo. And I remember there was these guys, there's the guys playing like medieval, like simulated war games, or dressed up in like, like Renaissance fair kind of like knights, and they were like hitting each other. So that was like going on in the background. And then it's like probably about like the 30, if not 40, like punk rock kids of Rock Springs, Wyoming, that gathered around the gazebo, and we didn't have amplifiers. So we're like, fuck it, we're just gonna play anyway. So we just were like, we're gonna play our electric guitars acoustically, but just play so hard you can hear it. So we played it, and I would swear, and then Gary just played like real muted and like put like a towel on top of his snare and played. And I would say, but the way that we attacked and the way we played, it was like 1,000%. We just played like as if it was just a real show, which it was a real show. And the kids, like, they were totally into it, and that was that was awesome.
Did you blow your voice out?
Oh, I would blow my voice out every show.
Okay, mic or no mic?
I would blow my voice out every show. I was just insane. And then what was another one? Two more. We played in some. Actually, I saw someone talking about this online, but we played it in like Pensacola. Like, this is someone that commented on one of these Donuts to Glory, like Facebook pages, and the guys, I don't know if he's going to the show or not, but someone's mom was the manager of like a Holiday Inn in Pensacola, and I remember walking on the sand there, and we stayed there. But we played in some like suburban house. Again, it was like the 40 punk rock kids of the town. They all went into this house, and there's like little kids, and the dad's cooking hot dogs, and we played in their living room. That was cool. That was super unexpected and cool. And that was like out of the blue. Like, they contacted us out of the blue, and we just said, okay, we'll do it. And then the last one is like the last show we played until the next one we're about to play. We were in Denver, like I said, and we got out of there. And then someone yelled at me, like, hey, you're in that band. I said, yeah, we're in that band. And he's like, you know what? He's like, you remind me, who you remind me of? I'm like, well, who? And he said, Tom Araya from Slayer. I'm like, oh, that's the greatest compliment I've ever received in my entire life. Thanks, man. In part, it has to do with probably screaming, playing bass, having big teeth, and like having big hair.
Sounds about right. And worshiping the devil.
And Satan worship.
Even though he's Christian.
I know, right? They all confessed and said they weren't Satan worshipers, and it was just for effect.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I was like, what the fuck?
And you know what? I think maybe if we were to reissue anything, I would like to have like a lot of like satanic themes. I think that would be cool. But you know what? This isn't a joke. We're real Satanists.
Oh, really?
So like that's very unpopular. That's really unpopular. Like, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, that's like remember when I found that out about Matt Skiba? You know Matt Skiba from Alkaline Trio?
No, not really, but I can take the story and tell me.
So Alkaline Trio was very popular, and they did a couple albums, and I was dating a girl at the time, and she's like, my sister told me that this singer's a Satanist. I was like, get the fuck out of here. No, he's not. And then they re-released years ago. They remastered and released their first record, and he's like, yeah, if you look on it, there's three clocks. They're all at 6 o'clock. And he's like, so that was our thing for 666. I was like, holy shit, he is. I was like, okay.
I mean, what a waste of time, man, being a Satanist.
What was it? That was a couple of years ago. The guy who wrote the Satanic Bible, he got like stabbed a couple times while he was doing a book reading. Did you hear about this?
Anton LaVey, is that what you're talking about?
I believe so. Yeah.
Well, Anton LaVey definitely is like the name of the main dude, like the high priest or whatever you call him.
Yeah, Anton LaVey. Yeah. That is him. Hold on, I just had to Google this to see. Stabbed. He looks like fucking. Remember that?
Kerry King. Doesn't he look like Kerry King? He's like bald head and like a little pointy beard.
He looks like, yeah, but he looks like, what was that, Flash Gordon or whatever that show was, with like Zing or something.
Ming the Merciless.
He looks like Ming the Merciless.
So where are you from in New Jersey?
Well, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina now, but I'm from Jefferson, New Jersey, which is, people would know the Rockaway Mall basically as the landmark.
You know, it's the strangest thing. It's like I live in New York and I live in Brooklyn and I've been to New Jersey a bit, but like I definitely don't know much about New Jersey at all. I just know like right across the river.
Yeah, there's no need for you to know New Jersey if you're living in Brooklyn.
Maybe there is a need. Who knows?
I mean, I like New Jersey. I did live in Hoboken from 2007 to 2010, so I was right over the river from you.
Oh yeah. I've been there, hung out there a couple times, but that's like kind of like obviously like a New York City satellite.
Yeah, that's like New York Light, is what I called it. It's still busy, but it's not as crazy as Manhattan. But I used to love taking the path into Manhattan and walking around. I was never a big Brooklyn guy. It was just too far.
But you know, I actually it was brought up. I thought it before, but like part of like when we were traveling around, and I said like we would go from town to town to town, and I would always like kind of hang out and talk and be with the people from the town. But there was a similarity between all those towns. What's the name of your town?
It was Jefferson, but we didn't really play shows there. We'd play in New Brunswick and Wayne, New Jersey, Livingston. Oh, we did Livingston. It was all Legion halls and firehouses. That's where we all played. It was so cool.
But even then, it's like Jefferson. I'm from Tustin, right? It's a little town in Orange County. But we would play these other towns. Like I'm sure, like Jefferson and Tustin. She's from Greenwich, Connecticut, but all these like suburban towns, they're all like they're very similar in the same. Like that's why that there was like a connection between all these different places, and it's very very, especially if you're in the same kind of music, like you're living very similar, like you're living in the same universe.
Yeah, we would notice that like, we did 8 tours, and every time we'd show up in a town, I was like, this is literally the same. Everyone looked the same clothing wise, same really welcoming thing, and just different vibe when the show would play. Some people would sit around and kind of look. If it was in California, everyone looked unimpressed the whole time. Like it really like if we played Northern California, that was a lot better. We played in Los Gatos, and we played with Link 80 at the time.
It's funny, like that those types of things you're just talking about. Those were like the lyrical content of like a few of our songs were about like just the crappy elements of shows and stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of like I always thought of it as they'd fold their arms like, okay, impress us, and you're like, all right, challenge accepted. And then when you see them loosen up and they'd start bobbing their heads, and then your merch table was just like a line of people, you're like, all right, we did it.
Well, that actually you're tapping into like a lot of like what one thing I really liked about playing shows in SoCal is like you would get that, but then they would get like I don't really care what you're doing with your arms at all. I'm just gonna go fucking crazy, and you can like it or not like it, and so we would always be like I would love to go even when we were getting bigger, we would still like play parties, and I would love to go to a party where you just knew they didn't know anything about you, and then all of a sudden you play that everyone's like, what the fuck is happening?
Maybe that's where that came from. Like maybe that whole going crazy live kind of this is a big jump, but when the way that I got really into playing more just like jumping around and stuff and having fun live is we saw so Bigwig is from New Jersey, and
oh yeah, right.
The first time we saw them was at some Legion Hall, or it was like this pavilion outside, and it was an all-day show, and they get up and just went nuts. I was like, what the fuck just happened? And I absolutely fell in love with them. But they were a huge Fat Records like influence band. So it's almost like California, like maybe it's where it started, where because Jersey and stuff were very accepting and they were all into it, but maybe in California because it was like you had to go hard to impress people, like maybe just kind of it just kind of bled out into other bands going, oh, this vibe works, we should do this.
Well, part of it, but I do agree with what you're saying, but I also see it's like it has like I started by saying like I saw Nonsense act crazy in that garage, right? And it was just like cool to see people just going fucking crazy. And it wasn't like I'm doing this to get fans. I just liked it. I thought it was fucking funny. I think it was funny to go. It's like look how wild you can be. This is amazing.
Well, it's like someone who's you ever go to some like how do I explain this? Like now, let's if you're out somewhere and there's dancing or something, you see people just let go, right? Unless I know a song, if I'm at a wedding and I'm like 5 bourbons deep, I'm like, all right, let's fucking go. Get some cash on. I'm like all about it. Other than that, I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I can't really get let loose. But for something about playing your own songs that you wrote, it literally just lets you just like I would just lose myself. And I think that's the most present I would ever be at any point in time was in playing a show, like always.
So right there, you got it though. That's the appeal of it all. It's the rawness. That's the appeal. That's like why anybody likes it. And I think sometimes I think like why is a band popular and why is another band unpopular? And it's because the band or the entertainer or whatever it is, they possess something that you want and something that you want to be a part of, something that's like attractive. And it's just like this abandon and like freedom and free, like being free. That's the appeal, and that's what it is, and that's why that's the entire appeal of it all. Is that it's embodying something that you want. You want to be fucking free. There's too many rules,
I think that's a great point.
and even if it's just for a moment, it's a moment. It's happening.
But I mean, like what we're talking about, we're remembering moments that were memorable. That's like the whole thing.
Are you going to the show?
My buddy Adam from he was in Link 80 back in the day. He's like, "You going to the show?" I was like, it's so far away. I don't know. I'm not a big traveler, but I'm like, and the show sold out. So
We'll see. We'll see. Who knows?
yeah, man.
We'll leave it at that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. All right, man. So last 2 questions. What would you like to plug? It could be about you. It could be about a friend. It could be about both.
I mean, our show, August 3rd, Chain Reaction, Anaheim. I think it's on Lincoln Boulevard.
Which is sold out and you can't get tickets for.
Well, stay tuned.
Oh, okay, okay.
Is that a plug?
That's a hell of a plug. It's probably the only plug you need to have. All right, man. Last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Do it yourself. Just do it yourself, man. It's like, if you don't like something, change it. Do it yourself. Figure it out. You don't need it anyone. You don't need the impetus need not come from others. You can just start it up yourself. Of course, you do it yourself doesn't mean like you're just by yourself, like you would get other people to collaborate with you. But it's like you could, if you don't like something, change it. If you don't like something, leave it. But you could, and that applies to obviously not just music, but your community, whatever you're doing, wherever world you're living, you can affect it by just having that spark to go do it. And that's like straight up from Maximum Rock and Roll, man. That's from do it. The whole culture is do it yourself. You can just make things happen. You don't have to wait for others. Be yourself. Do what you want. Say what you can.